I was standing in front of the Vrick Stalker enclosure when the alarms in my career started going off, though I did not recognize them at the time. Let me back up for just a moment and tell you who I am. My name is Vrelik. I am the head fauna curator of the Galactic Preserve of Exotic and Hazardous Life Forms, the largest collection of dangerous creatures in the known galaxy. I have held this position for 40 orbital cycles. Every containment field, every warning hologram, every reinforced barricade in the Deathworld Predator wing has my authorization stamp on it. I built this wing from nothing. It is the most visited attraction in the entire Orion Arm, and I am proud of it in a way that borders on obsession. The Deathworld Predator wing houses specimens from Class 7 through Class 12 worlds. For those unfamiliar with the classification system, a Class 7 world is a planet where the atmosphere alone can damage your respiratory lining. A Class 12 is a planet so hostile that even the bacteria there have evolved offensive capabilities. Most spacefaring species come from Class 2 or Class 3 worlds, places where the weather is mild, the food chain is short, and the biggest predator might weigh 40 kilograms on a heavy day. The creatures in my wing come from places that would reduce those gentle homeworlds to ash. I was doing my morning walkthrough, the same route I take every single day. First stop, the Vrick Stalker from Harkon 4, a Class 8 Deathworld. The Vricks is a beautiful nightmare. 6 legs, each tipped with a hooked claw that can puncture starship hull plating. 2 primary eyes, and 14 secondary sensor clusters that detect heat, motion, and electromagnetic fields simultaneously. It hunts in complete darkness, and has never, in recorded history, failed to catch prey it has targeted. We keep it behind triple barrier plasma shielding. The barriers cycle at randomized frequencies, so the creature cannot learn the pattern. The sign in front of its enclosure warns visitors with cardiac conditions to maintain a 10-meter distance. I watched a school group walk past it that morning, and 3 of the children started crying just from seeing it move. I love my job. Second stop, the Sketh from Yulin Prime, a Class 9 world. The Sketh is a burrowing ambush predator that can remain motionless underground for up to 6 standard months, surviving on nothing, waiting for vibrations that indicate surface movement. When it strikes, it moves at speeds our motion sensors cannot track in real time. We have to use predictive algorithms just to confirm it has changed position. The containment floor in its enclosure is 12 centimeters of reinforced uranium plating because it chewed through the first 3 materials we tried. Visitors love the Sketh. They press their faces against the observation window and ask where it is, and then one of my staff activates the vibration simulator, and the Sketh explodes from the ground in a blur of teeth and chitin, and the visitors scream and stumble backward and take holographic recordings to share with their friends. I love my job very much. But the crown jewel of the entire wing, the exhibit that draws visitors from 17 star systems, the reason our operating budget is 4 times larger than any comparable institution, sits at the very end of the corridor. The final exhibit, the grand finale, the Earth specimens. Earth. Class 12, the highest classification our system allows. I designed this exhibit personally. I spent 3 years securing the funding, 2 years negotiating specimen acquisition, and another year designing containment protocols that our safety board called the most expensive in the preserve's history. Behind 7 layers of overlapping force barriers, inside an enclosure built from materials that cost more per square centimeter than most starship armor, sat a pair of small, 4-legged, fur-covered creatures with retractable claws and reflective eyes. Felis catus, the domestic house cat. The placard I wrote described them as apex ambush predators from Earth's dominant ecosystem. I detailed their night vision, which operates at light levels that would render most species completely blind. I explained their retractable claws, concealed weapons that deploy in milliseconds. I documented their whisker-based spatial awareness, their flexible spines capable of rotating nearly 180 degrees, their padded feet that allow completely silent movement, and their prey-tracking instinct that can fixate on a target for hours without a single lapse in concentration. Visitors would crowd around the barrier line, keeping well behind the safety markers, and take holographic images of the creatures. Some trembled. I saw more than one parent cover the eyes of their young. The cats, for their part, mostly slept. It was perfect. It was everything I had built my reputation on. And then the humans walked in. I noticed them immediately. You always notice humans. It is not that they are physically imposing, though they are taller than most species. It is something else. Something in the way they move through a space that is designed to frighten. Every other species that enters the Deathworld predator wing shows the same physiological responses. Elevated pulse, contracted pupils, shortened stride, involuntary clustering. These are universal fear indicators across more than 800 cataloged sapient species. Humans show none of them. This particular family was a diplomatic attachment stationed at the trade hub one system over. The father was tall, broad across the chest, and walked with the kind of loose, unhurried gait that I had only ever seen in apex predators. The mother was reviewing something on a data pad, occasionally glancing up at exhibits with the mild interest of someone who had seen more impressive things before breakfast. And the child, a girl of maybe 7 or 8 standard years, was moving through the wing like a small, chaotic energy storm. She ran from exhibit to exhibit, pressing her face against barriers that made grown adults of other species step back, and she made noises at the creatures. Happy noises, excited noises. She was not afraid. None of them were afraid. The child reached the Vrickstalker. She pressed her nose against the observation window and said, loudly, that it looked like a big crab, the 6-legged, hull-puncturing nightmare predator from a Class 8 Deathworld. A big crab. Her father gently redirected her down the corridor, and she bounced along ahead of them until she reached the final exhibit. The Earth specimens. My Earth specimens. The house cats. She stopped. Her face went through a series of expressions I had never seen on any species in front of this exhibit. Confusion. Recognition. More confusion. Then something I could not identify at all. She tugged her father's sleeve and said, in a voice loud enough for every visitor in the corridor to hear, "Daddy, why do they have mittens in a cage?" The father looked at the exhibit. His face moved through its own sequence. Confusion. Recognition. And then something happened that I had never seen a human do inside my wing. The corners of his mouth pulled upward, and his chest made a short, rhythmic vibrating sound. I later learned this was called laughing. "Those are just kitty cats," the child said. She turned to the visitors near her, most of whom were standing well behind the barrier line. "We have 2 at home. Why is there a warning sign?" She pressed her face against the outermost force barrier. "Can I pet them?" Every alien visitor within earshot stopped moving. I felt my blood temperature drop 2 degrees. A Thessan merchant gripped his mate's arm so hard I heard the joint click. The father crouched down and spoke quietly to the child. He told her they would talk about it later, but the child was already reading the placard, sounding out the longer words with the slow determination of someone still learning. Apex ambush predator. She turned back to her father. "Daddy, it says they are dangerous. That is silly. Mr. Whiskers sleeps on my face." I approached the family. I am a professional. I have handled difficult visitors before. I maintained my composure and introduced myself as the curator of the wing, and I explained, politely, and with the authority of 4 decades of xenobiological expertise, that the specimens in this enclosure were among the most lethal hunters ever catalogued in our system. The father looked at me. He had brown eyes, and they held an expression I could not decode. It was not hostile, it was not dismissive. It was something closer to pity, and that frightened me more than anything in the wing. He said, very calmly, "My daughter sleeps with one of these on her face every night. It purrs." I did not know what purring was. I looked it up later. It is a voluntary vibration that the creature produces, apparently to indicate contentment. The child's apex ambush predator was vibrating with happiness while resting on her face during her unconscious hours. I excused myself. I walked to my office. I closed the door. I sat in my chair and placed my hands flat on my desk because they were shaking. Then I pulled up Earth's full fauna index. I had never opened it completely. When I first acquired the house cat specimens, I had accessed only the specific file for Felis catus. The full index had been flagged by my system as a possible data corruption error because of its size. I had assumed the flag was a glitch. I now opened the full file and understood that it was not a glitch. The file was simply that large. 800,000 entries. 800,000 distinct species of animal. And that was only the currently living ones. The file noted that Earth had produced an estimated 5 billion species over its 4 billion-year biological history, with a current extinction rate that the file described as historically elevated, but within parameters for a death world undergoing dominant species industrialization. I sorted the index by lethality rating. The house cat did not appear in the first 10,000 entries. I scrolled to entry number 1. It was something called Crocodilus porosus, the saltwater crocodile. I read its profile: length up to 6 meters, weight exceeding 1,000 kilograms, bite force measured at over 16,000 newtons, which my system helpfully converted to a comparison, approximately 4 times the force required to crush our strongest containment-grade ceramics. The species had existed in functionally identical form for over 200 million years because evolution had looked at this thing and decided it was already finished, already perfect, already the best possible version of a killing machine that water and land could produce. And the house cat, the creature I had placed behind 7 force barriers and described as an apex ambush predator, the centerpiece of the most expensive exhibit in the preserve's history, was ranked below this thing by a factor I could not calculate because my system ran out of decimal places. I sat in my office. I stared at the screen. Outside, I could hear the child's voice echoing down the corridor, asking her father if they could come back tomorrow and bring treats for the kiddies. I opened my personal log and began recording, because I was fairly certain that no one was going to believe what I was about to find. I did not sleep that night. I did not sleep the next night either. I sat at my desk and scrolled through Earth's fauna index, and with every entry, the foundation of my career cracked a little more. I started with the large predators because that seemed logical. If the house cat was merely a minor entry, then the major entries would tell me what I was actually dealing with. Bears. There were 8 species of bear on Earth. 8. Not one dominant variant with minor regional differences. 8 fully distinct species, each adapted to a different killing environment. The largest, the polar bear, weighed over 700 kilograms and hunted in an environment so cold that exposed flesh would die in minutes. It could swim for days without rest, in water that would stop the heart of most galactic species in seconds. It could smell prey from over a kilometer away, through snow, through ice, through wind. Its fur was not actually white. It was transparent. Each individual hair was a hollow tube that scattered light. Even the creature's camouflage was an engineering achievement. And here is the detail that made me set down my datapad and stare at the wall for a full minute. Humans voluntarily entered polar bear territory. For recreation. They had a word for it. They called it camping. Wolves. Pack hunters. Coordinated, disciplined, hierarchical pack hunters that used pursuit predation, the single most terrifying hunting strategy in known galactic warfare doctrine. Pursuit predation means you do not ambush, you do not trap, you do not surprise. You simply follow your prey at a sustainable pace, for hours, for days if necessary, until the prey's body fails from exhaustion. Then you eat it. Our military academies teach this as a theoretical worst-case scenario. On Earth, wolves invented it as a Tuesday afternoon. And then I reached the entry for hippopotamus, and everything I thought I understood about ecology collapsed. The file classified the hippopotamus as an herbivore, a plant eater. It consumed grasses and aquatic vegetation. It had blunt, flat teeth designed for grinding. By every standard metric, it should have been a harmless, lumbering grazer. The lethality data told a different story. The hippopotamus was responsible for more sapient analog deaths per cycle on Earth than most Class 6 Deathworld apex predators. It was territorial, aggressive, and capable of speeds that outran most bipedal species. Its jaws could bite a small watercraft in half. It killed not for food, not for survival, but because something entered its space, and it objected. A plant eater that killed more effectively than predators on worlds we classified as dangerous. Earth did not follow rules. I pulled the housecat file again and read it with fresh eyes. Everything on the placard in my exhibit was technically accurate. Retractable claws, yes. Night vision, yes. Silent ambush hunting, yes. Flexible spine, whisker-based awareness, prey fixation, all yes. All true. all completely laughably insufficient as a representation of Earth's predatory fauna. The full entry classified the house cat as a minor mesopredator. Its primary prey consisted of insects, rodents, and small birds. Its primary predators consisted of, and I am quoting the file directly, virtually everything larger than it. Eagles ate house cats. Coyotes ate house cats. Large snakes ate house cats. On Earth, the house cat was not an apex predator. It was a mid-level participant in a food chain so violent and competitive that mid-level still qualified it as terrifying by galactic standards. And then I found the annotation that broke me. Species has been selectively bred by humans for aesthetic variation. See Persian, Sphinx, Ragdoll, Maine Coon, Scottish Fold. I looked up these variants. Humans had taken a predator, a genuine, clawed, fanged, hunting predator, and they had redesigned it. Not for utility, not for labor, not for war, for appearance. They had spent centuries carefully breeding these creatures to have flatter faces, longer fur, rounder eyes, and softer temperaments. They had engineered versions of a killer for the sole purpose of making it cuter. I called an emergency meeting with my curatorial staff. Seska, my deputy curator, arrived first. She is the toughest person I have ever worked with. I once watched her hand capture a venomous Trellic fang serpent with nothing but a standard containment rod and a vocabulary of profanity that would strip paint from a starship hull. She sat down across from me and asked why I looked like I had not eaten in 2 days, and I told her it was because I had not eaten in 2 days. I presented my findings, the full comparison, the house cat, contextualized within Earth's actual fauna index. The room went quiet, then it went loud. Seska argued that the Earth exhibit was still valid. The house cat was a predator. It had weapons. It had hunting instincts. It qualified. I told her that exhibiting a house cat in the Deathworld predator wing was equivalent to exhibiting a garden beetle from Thesson 3 in the lethal arthropod wing, because the beetle technically had mandibles. The comparison was not insulting to the beetle. It was insulting to every actual predator sharing the wing with it. Morev, my senior xenobiologist, asked the obvious question. If not the house cat, then what? What should we put in the Earth exhibit? I pulled up an entry I had bookmarked at 3 in the morning during my 11th hour of scrolling. The Wolverine, 45 kilograms, small enough to fit in a supply crate. Documented killing prey 10 times its own body weight. Documented driving grizzly bears, actual grizzly bears, away from their own kills through sheer aggression. A temperament profile that my system summarized as unrelenting hostility toward all living things, regardless of size differential. I read the behavioral profile aloud. Seska's feeding tendrils went flat. Morev leaned back in his chair. I then read the entry for the honey badger, 12 kilograms, immune to most venoms, documented attacking and consuming venomous snakes for nutrition, skin so thick and loose that if a predator grabbed it from behind, the honey badger could rotate within its own skin and bite the predator in the face. A creature so aggressive that large predators on Earth had evolved a specific avoidance behavior for it. Not a hunting behavior, an avoidance behavior. Predators ran from this thing. Seska asked me to stop. I did not stop. I had been awake for 2 days, and I had lost the ability to stop. I read them, the entry for the mantis shrimp, a small aquatic creature that could strike with the force of a bullet and see in 16 color channels, compared to the 3 that most galactic species possessed. I read them the entry for the army ant, which traveled in colonies of millions and consumed everything organic in its path. I read them the entry for the kangaroo, and 2 members of my staff left the room. The meeting ended without resolution. Morev filed a formal complaint about the meeting's content. Seska went home, and reportedly did not speak to anyone for the rest of the day. I went back to my desk and kept reading. The human family returned the next morning. The child, whose name I now knew was Lily, ran immediately to the house cat exhibit and pressed herself against the barrier. She made soft, high-pitched noises at the cats. One of them, the tabby, walked toward the barrier and pressed its head against the force field on its side. The field shimmered slightly from the pressure. Lily was delighted. Her father approached me. He was holding 2 cups of what I later learned was called coffee, a liquid stimulant extracted from roasted plant seeds. He offered me one. I declined because I did not know if it was compatible with my biology, and also because I was afraid of him. He apologized for any trouble his daughter might have caused. I told him she had caused no trouble, which was technically true. The trouble had been caused by my own 40 years of catastrophic ignorance. I chose my next words carefully. I asked him, as casually as I could manage, if the house cat was not considered dangerous on Earth, what was? He thought about it. He took a drink of his coffee. He said sharks, and then stopped himself and said, actually, sharks were not even the worst thing in the water. I asked what was worse than a shark. He told me about the box jellyfish, a creature with no brain, no bones, no blood, and no centralized nervous system. A translucent blob of tissue trailing tentacles that could kill a fully grown human in under 4 minutes through a venom so potent that the pain alone could cause cardiac arrest before the toxin finished its work. I sat down on the nearest bench. He kept talking. He told me about the blue-ringed octopus, small enough to fit in a human palm, carrying enough venom to kill 26 adult humans with no known antidote. He told me about the stonefish, which disguised itself as a rock on the ocean floor and injected venom through spines in its back when stepped on. He told me about the cone snail, a creature with a shell that moved at a pace I could outrun without standing up, that fired a venomous harpoon capable of penetrating diving equipment. I asked him to stop talking about the ocean. He offered, casually, the way one might offer directions to a restaurant, to send me some nature documentaries from Earth. He said they might help with the exhibit. He said his daughter watched them before bed sometimes. Before bed. His child watched footage of Earth's fauna as a relaxation aid before sleeping. I agreed to receive the documentaries. That evening, a data package arrived from his personal terminal. 600 hours of footage. The first file was titled Planet Earth. I opened it. The narrator had a calm, deep voice. Soothing, measured. The kind of voice you might use to ease someone through a medical procedure. The footage was not soothing. The footage was not measured. The footage was a relentless, high-definition assault on everything I believed about the natural order of the universe. I watched a pride of large predatory cats bring down a water buffalo in coordinated formation. The buffalo fought. It kicked and thrashed and gored one of the attackers with its horns, and the attackers did not retreat. They adjusted. They regrouped. They adapted their strategy in real time, mid-hunt, the way a military unit adjusts to battlefield conditions. And then they brought it down, and the footage did not look away. My feeding tentacles hung limp at my sides. My log recorder was still running. When I played back the recording later, the only sound it captured for 12 straight minutes was my own rapid, shallow breathing, and the calm voice of the narrator, explaining the hunting patterns of creatures that would be classified as war crimes on most civilized worlds. I watched 4 more hours before my body forced me to sleep. I dreamed about wolves. They were running. They were not running fast. They did not need to. They just needed to keep running. That was the nightmare. Not the teeth, not the claws, not the howling, just the running. The patient, tireless, endless running. When I woke up, I had 11 messages from my staff asking if I was coming to work, and 1 message from Lily's father asking if I had enjoyed the documentaries. I responded to my staff that I would be late. I did not respond to the father because I did not know how to describe what the documentaries had done to me using polite language. I should not have shown the documentaries to my staff. I acknowledge this now with the full clarity of hindsight. What I intended was a brief professional development session, perhaps 30 minutes of curated clips to provide context for a discussion about restructuring the Earth exhibit. What actually happened was a 7-hour involuntary viewing marathon that resulted in 2 medical leaves, 1 resignation, and a formal complaint filed with the preserve's governing board about psychologically hazardous training materials. The complaint was filed by Moriv. It was his 2nd complaint in a week. Under normal circumstances, I would have been annoyed by this. Under these circumstances, I understood completely, because I was the one who had pressed play on the episode about parasitic wasps. Let me describe what happened in that conference room. I started with what I considered a relatively mild segment. African wild dogs hunting on an open plain. I chose it because the animals were visually distinctive, brightly patterned, and the hunt demonstrated coordinated pack behavior that I thought would provide useful comparison data for our existing predator classifications. The hunt lasted 11 minutes of footage. There is one hero. The dogs rotated positions, maintaining pursuit, while individual pack members rested. They communicated through vocalizations, adjusting their formation based on the prey's escape attempts. When the prey finally fell, every dog in the pack ate in an organized sequence. Seska watched this without visible reaction. I was impressed. She turned to me when it ended and said, "Coordinated pursuit predation with role rotation and communication-based tactical adjustment." I confirmed, she said. "Our military does not do that." I confirmed again. She asked how large the dogs were. I told her they averaged around 25 kilograms. She went quiet for a long time. The next segment I showed was about army ants. This is where I lost to Siska. Not because of what the ants did to their prey, though that was deeply unpleasant. It was the scale. The footage showed a colony on the move. Millions of individual organisms moving as a single entity, flowing across the ground like a liquid, consuming every organic thing in their path. The narrator explained that army ant colonies could contain over 700,000 individuals, and that they did not build permanent nests. They were nomadic. They marched, they consumed, they moved on. They had no fixed home. They had no territory to defend. They simply advanced, and everything in front of them either fled or ceased to exist. Seska stood up, excused herself, and walked out. She later told me it was not the ants themselves that bothered her. It was the realization that Earth produced organisms that functioned as a distributed superorganism, millions of bodies operating under a single collective intelligence, and that humans had classified this as a minor inconvenience. The ants were not even in the top 100 most dangerous things on the planet. Humans had a word for encountering army ants. They called it annoying. Morov lasted longer. He was a scientist to his core, and his intellectual curiosity kept overriding his survival instincts. He watched the hunting segments, the territorial displays, the predator-prey interactions with professional detachment. He took notes. He asked questions. He cross-referenced what he was seeing with our existing databases. He was handling it. Then I played the segment about parasitic wasps. The narrator's calm voice explained that certain species of wasp on Earth reproduced by injecting their eggs into living host organisms. The larvae would then hatch inside the host and consume it from the inside, carefully avoiding vital organs to keep the host alive for as long as possible. Some species could even manipulate the host's behavior, essentially hijacking its nervous system to serve the larvae's needs. The host would continue to move, to eat, to function, while being consumed from within by creatures that had evolved to treat another living being as a disposable incubator. Morov set down his datapad. He stared at the screen for approximately 10 seconds. Then he said, in a voice that was completely level and completely empty, "That violates the Sentient Welfare Accords." I told him the wasps were not sentient. He said he did not care. He filed the complaint that afternoon. The third casualty was my intern, Pelik, young, eager, brilliant, top of her class at the Academy of Xenobiological Sciences. She had been watching the documentary with the wide-eyed fascination of someone who had not yet learned to be afraid of knowledge. She survived the wolves. She survived the ants. She survived the parasitic wasps. She even survived a segment about crocodiles that made 2 other staff members excuse themselves to visit the sanitary facilities. What broke Pelik was the octopus. The footage showed a common octopus moving across a coral reef. It was one color, a mottled brown, and then, in less than a second, it became the exact color, texture, and pattern of the coral beneath it. Not approximately, not closely, exactly. The creature vanished. It was there, and then it was not. And the only way the camera operator relocated it was by disturbing the water and watching for movement. Pelik watched this, and then she watched the octopus squeeze its entire body through an opening smaller than its own eye. She watched it unscrew a jar from the inside. She watched it solve a multi-step puzzle to access food. She watched it change not just its color but its texture, raising bumps and ridges on its skin to match the surface it rested on. Pelik turned to me and said, "That planet has no rules." Then she stood up, collected her personal items and walked out of the building. She submitted her resignation that evening. Her letter cited fundamental incompatibility between my academic training and observable reality as the reason for her departure. The governing board summoned me 3 days later. I received the notification on my datapad while sitting in the empty conference room, still staring at the screen where the octopus footage had played. The notification was polite, formal, and carried the unmistakable undertone of an institution preparing to assign blame. The board chamber is an imposing room. High ceilings, curved walls, seats arranged in a descending arc around a central presentation area, designed to make the person standing at the center feel small and accountable. 7 board members sat in those seats, all senior administrators with decades of experience in xenobiological preservation, all of them looking at me with expressions that ranged from concerned to irritated. They had Morov's complaint in front of them. They had Pelik's resignation letter. They had a medical report from one of the staff members who had experienced acute anxiety symptoms during the documentary viewing. They wanted an explanation. I came prepared. I had spent the 3 days since the documentary incident building a comparative analysis that I believed would either save my career or end it spectacularly. I chose to present it because I had reached a point where professional caution seemed less important than professional honesty. I projected a side-by-side comparison on the main display. On the left, every specimen currently in the Deathworld predator wing. On the right, its closest Earth analog. The Vrick Stalker, our premier exhibit, the creature behind triple plasma barriers that made children cry and adults tremble. 6 legs, hooked claws, multi-spectrum sensory array, documented lethal efficiency. I placed its profile next to the Earth entry for the red fox. Similar body mass, similar hunting strategy, similar prey profile. The fox was slightly faster. The Vricks had better sensory range. In terms of overall lethality, the comparison was essentially a draw. The room went quiet. I continued. The Sketh, our burrowing ambush predator. I placed it next to the trapdoor spider from Earth. Similar size to prey ratio. Similar ambush methodology. Similar strike speed. The trapdoor spider was, if anything, slightly more efficient in its hunting success rate. I added a note that on Earth, the trapdoor spider was considered mildly interesting and was kept as a pet by human children. Some children collected them. The chairman of the board leaned forward. His name was Director Hallman, and he had been running the preserve since before I joined. He asked, very carefully, "Are you telling us that our entire wing is underclassified?" I told him no. The wing was fine. The wing was accurate for what it contained. The problem was not our specimens. The problem was Earth. Earth could not be classified. Earth broke every scaling system we had because it was not a single environment. It was thousands of environments, each one producing its own apex predators, all of them competing, all of them evolving in response to each other, in an arms race that had been running without interruption for 4 billion years. I proposed a complete overhaul. Not just swapping the house cats for something more representative. A full, dedicated Earth pavilion. Multiple habitats, multiple biomes. A permanent exhibition that would give visitors an accurate understanding of what Class 12 actually meant. The board was skeptical. The budget alone would be enormous. Containment technology for actual Earth predators would require engineering we had not yet developed. Director Hallman asked me what I expected visitors to take away from this pavilion. I told him the truth. I told him that right now, visitors walked through the Deathworld predator wing and left believing a house cat was the most dangerous thing Earth had produced. Those visitors were walking through the galaxy fundamentally unprepared for any genuine encounter with Earth life. That was not just a scientific failure. It was a safety failure. The board discussed. They debated. They requested cost projections and feasibility studies. I could see them wavering toward a polite rejection. So I played my final card. I projected 30 seconds of footage. A honey badger, 12 kilograms, flat-headed, thick-skinned, utterly fearless, walking directly toward a full-grown male lion. The lion was 7 times the badger's weight. It had claws the length of my fingers and teeth that could crush bone. The honey badger did not slow down. It did not display threat postures. It simply walked at the lion with the calm confidence of something that had never once, in its entire evolutionary history, considered the possibility that it might lose a fight. The lion moved out of the way. Director Hallman approved the funding before the clip finished playing. I contacted Earth's Xenobiological Outreach Office the next day and requested a consulting specialist. The process took 2 weeks of bureaucratic negotiation, 3 security clearances, and a formal agreement that any Earth fauna transported to the station would be done so under strict conservation protocols that the humans enforced with a seriousness that surprised me. They cared deeply about their animals, even the ones that could kill them, especially the ones that could kill them. They sent me Dr. Priya Vasquez. She arrived on a standard transport shuttle, carrying a single duffel bag and wearing clothing that looked like it had survived several environments more hostile than our station's climate-controlled corridors. Her boots were scuffed with the kind of wear that comes from actual terrain, not station flooring. She was small by human standards, compact, with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes that moved constantly, cataloging everything around her with a speed that reminded me uncomfortably of predator tracking behavior. She shook my hand when she arrived, a human greeting that involved gripping another person's primary manipulator and moving it up and down. Her grip was firm. Everything about her was firm. She had spent time on 3 alien worlds as part of cultural exchange programs. She had published papers on comparative xenobiology that were considered foundational texts in the field. She was, by every academic metric, one of Earth's foremost experts on how alien species perceive terrestrial life. I gave her a tour of the existing Deathworld predator wing. She walked through it slowly, examining each exhibit with what I initially interpreted as professional interest. It took me approximately 10 minutes to realize she was trying not to laugh. She was kind about it. She told me my containment work was excellent for the threat level involved. She said the environmental simulations were some of the best she had seen outside of Earth-based facilities. She complimented my staff's dedication and the quality of our behavioral monitoring systems. Then she asked what I wanted to put in the new pavilion. I gave her my wish list. It was organized by biome and ranked by public interest potential. She read through it, and her expression changed. The amusement drained away and was replaced by something more careful. She told me that several of the animals on my list could not be safely exhibited using current alien containment technology. I asked if we needed stronger barriers. She said no. She said the issue was not strength. Earth predators were creative. She used that word, creative. I asked her to explain, because in my understanding, creativity was a trait associated with sapient species, not animals. She gave me 3 examples. The saltwater crocodile. It could learn, not in the abstract theoretical sense that most galactic species applied to animal cognition. It learned specific patterns. If prey visited the same water source at the same time each day, the crocodile would be waiting at that exact spot, at that exact time, on the following day. It built predictive models of prey behavior and adjusted its hunting strategy accordingly. It was not intelligent in the way we measured intelligence. It was something more unsettling. It was patient, and it remembered. The crow, a bird, a small, black, flying creature that weighed less than a kilogram. It used tools. It manufactured tools from raw materials, selecting and shaping objects to serve specific purposes. It solved multi-step puzzles that required planning and sequential logic, and it held grudges. Individual crows could recognize specific human faces and would alter their behavior toward humans who had previously threatened them. They communicated these grudges to other crows. A human who antagonized a single crow could find themselves harassed by every crow in a territory, for years, including crows who had never personally encountered that human. The orca, a marine predator that weighed up to 6,000 kilograms. It hunted in coordinated family pods using strategies that varied by region, unique cultural traditions of violence passed from parent to offspring. One population had developed a technique where individual orcas would intentionally launch themselves out of the water and onto land to catch prey on the shore, then wriggle back into the ocean. They had taught themselves to beach on purpose. They had looked at the fundamental barrier between marine and terrestrial life and decided it was optional. These animals did not just hunt, Dr. Vasquez told me. They adapted. They innovated. They planned. I asked her what the most dangerous predator on Earth was. She looked at me with an expression that told me she had been waiting for this question since she arrived. She said, You have already met them. They are the ones who tamed everything else on the list. She was talking about humans. I asked if she was making a joke. She pulled out her personal data device and showed me a photograph. It showed her, approximately 15 years younger, standing next to a saltwater crocodile. The crocodile was sedated, but still enormous, easily 4 meters long, its jaws held open by her bare hands. She was smiling. Behind her, 3 other humans were attaching a tracking device to the creature's tail. They were also smiling. Everyone in the photograph looked as though they were having an enjoyable afternoon. I stared at that photograph for a very long time. The creature in the image was the same species I had read about in the Fauna Index, the one with a bite force that could crush our strongest containment ceramics, the one that had remained unchanged for 200 million years because evolution could not improve it. And this woman, this small, soft-skinned, blunt-toothed human woman, had held its mouth open with her hands and smiled about it. I looked at the photograph, and I understood something I should have understood the moment a 7-year-old girl asked me why I had put her house pet behind 7 force barriers. The exhibit was not wrong about Earth being Class 12. It was wrong about which species to be afraid of. Construction on the Earth Pavilion began the following week, and it was a disaster from the very first day. Not a structural disaster. The engineering was sound. The materials were top grade. The construction crew was experienced and professional. The disaster was philosophical. Every single design decision revealed another gap between what we understood about containing dangerous creatures and what Earth actually required. The first major confrontation happened over the wolf enclosure. Our engineering team built a prototype based on our standard apex predator containment specifications. Reinforced alloy fencing, 3 meters high, seismic stability anchors, motion detection sensor grid, environmental simulation capable of reproducing a temperate forest biome. It was, by our standards, a top-tier enclosure. Any creature in our current collection would have been securely and comfortably contained within it. Dr. Vasquez walked the perimeter once, stopped, crouched down, and pressed her hand against the base of the fencing. Then she stood up and told the engineering team she had identified 11 points of failure. 11. The lead engineer, a Thessan named Boric, who had designed containment systems for 30 years, looked at her as though she had insulted his family lineage. He asked her to be specific. She pointed at the base of the fencing. "Wolves dig," she said. The team had not accounted for digging because none of our current specimens combined burrowing capability with climbing capability with problem-solving capability. Our containment philosophy was built around isolating threats. A creature that burrows gets a reinforced floor. A creature that climbs gets an overhanging barrier. A creature that problem solves gets randomized lock mechanisms. No creature in our collection did all 3. Wolves did all 3. She asked if the fencing was electrified. Boric told her it was a force barrier, standard frequency. She asked what happened during a power fluctuation. On our station, power fluctuations were rare and lasted milliseconds. Boric told her this. She told him a wolf could identify a barrier gap in less time than that. The team redesigned the enclosure. They added a reinforced subfloor. They added a secondary barrier system on an independent power supply. They added an overhang. Dr. Vasquez reviewed the redesign and identified 6 more issues, including the observation windows, which she said were positioned at a height that would allow a motivated wolf to study the latch mechanisms on the maintenance access panels. Study. She used that word, as though a wolf would sit and observe and learn. I asked her if she was serious. She told me about a case on Earth where a pack of wolves in a wildlife sanctuary had learned to cooperate to open a gate. One wolf distracted the handler while another manipulated the latch. When the handlers changed the latch mechanism, the wolves spent 3 days investigating the new one before solving it. When the handlers added a second latch, the wolves assigned a third member to work on it. Boric redesigned the enclosure for a 3rd time. This time, he eliminated all visible mechanical components from the interior entirely. He also, on his own initiative, added a secondary observation system that monitored the wolves' eye movements to detect if they were tracking maintenance staff through the barriers. When I asked him why, he said, very quietly, that he had started watching the documentaries himself, and that he was no longer willing to underestimate anything with forward-facing eyes and a social hierarchy. A pattern emerged during the construction process. Our engineers built to contain strength. Dr. Vasquez redesigned to contain intelligence. Every enclosure went through this cycle. Build, review, identify the assumption that Earth would punish, rebuild. The shark enclosure required water chemistry monitoring that exceeded anything we had ever installed because, as Dr. Vasquez explained, saltwater corroded materials that our engineers had assumed were permanent. Earth's oceans were not just full of predators. The water itself was destructive. The engineering team stopped arguing with her after the fourth enclosure and started consulting her before the first draft. In the middle of this chaos, Lily returned. She had become a regular visitor. Her family came to the preserve at least twice a week, and Lily spent most of each visit at the house cat exhibit, talking to the cats through the barrier in a high, sing-song voice that the cats appeared to respond to. She brought things with her. Drawings, mostly. Crayon on actual paper, a material I had only seen in historical archives. The drawings depicted cats in various poses and settings, rendered with the enthusiastic imprecision of a child who cared more about affection than accuracy. She gave me one of these drawings during her third visit. It showed a round orange shape with triangular ears, whisker lines, and an expression that I think was meant to be a smile. She told me it was Mr. Whiskers, one of her cats at home. She told me Mr. Whiskers liked to knock things off tables, and then stare at the fallen objects as though they had jumped on their own. I did not know what to do with the drawing. I pinned it to the wall of my office. It remained there for the duration of the project, and eventually well beyond. Lily discovered the construction site during one of her visits and immediately demanded a tour. Her father gave me an apologetic look. I gave Lily a tour. She asked approximately 400 questions, most of which I could not answer, and she expressed strong opinions about the color choices for the environmental simulations. Dr. Vasquez met the family during one of these visits and bonded with Lily almost immediately. They spoke about animals with the rapid, overlapping enthusiasm of two people who had found a kindred spirit. Dr. Vasquez showed Lily the design plans for the wolf habitat, and Lily started talking about wolves she had seen at a place on Earth called Yellowstone. She described them with a familiarity that suggested she had been quite close to them. Her father confirmed that they had taken a family trip to observe wolves in the wild. In the wild. They had traveled to where the wolves lived, on purpose. Dr. Vasquez asked Lily what her favorite animal was. Lily said, without any hesitation at all, dogs. I looked up dogs later that evening. The search result made me close my datapad and sit in complete silence for several minutes. Dogs were wolves. Humans had taken wolves, coordinated pack-hunting apex predators with bite forces that could snap bone, and they had turned them into companions. Not through force, not through technological subjugation, through thousands of years of selective cohabitation. They had identified individual wolves with slightly less aggressive temperaments, encouraged those wolves to remain near human settlements, fed them, sheltered them, and over generations, shaped them into something new, something that still carried the genetic blueprint of a killer but chose, through conditioning and genuine bond, to sleep at the foot of a child's bed and growl at strangers who came too close. Human children slept curled up with domesticated wolves. This was considered normal. This was considered comforting. The domesticated wolf, the dog, would guard the child through the night, alert to every sound, every movement, every potential threat, and respond with protective aggression toward anything that approached. Humans had turned a predator into a guardian. They had looked at the thing most likely to eat their young and convinced it to die protecting them instead. I thought about Lily. I thought about her sleeping at home with her cats on her face and, almost certainly, a dog somewhere nearby. She lived in a household full of creatures that any galactic risk assessment would classify as immediate threats. She called them family. I had a conversation with Dr. Vasquez that evening in my office. The construction noise had stopped for the day, and the corridors were quiet. I asked her something that had been building in me since the first day the human family walked into my wing. Why were humans not afraid? Every other spacefaring species I had encountered had evolved on worlds where fear was the primary survival mechanism. See a predator, flee, hear a threat, hide, detect danger, retreat. This was universal. This was fundamental. Fear kept you alive by keeping you away from things that could kill you. Humans had evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill them, and their response was not to flee. It was not to hide. It was to walk toward the danger, study it, learn its patterns, and then either kill it, eat it, tame it, or ride it. Sometimes all four, in that order. Dr. Vasquez considered my question. She told me that humans were not fearless. She said this clearly and firmly, as though correcting a common misconception. Humans were afraid all the time. They feared heights, darkness, enclosed spaces, open water, loud noises, spiders, snakes, social rejection, and death. They were, in her words, a profoundly anxious species. The difference, she explained, was that fear on Earth was not a stop signal. On most worlds, fear meant do not approach. On Earth, fear meant something needs to be dealt with. It was an alert, not an instruction. Humans felt fear and then made a decision about what to do with it. She told me about a concept called courage. She defined it as the decision that something else matters more than fear, not the absence of fear, the overriding of it. Humans were afraid of wolves and decided that companionship mattered more. Humans were afraid of oceans and decided that exploration mattered more. Humans were afraid of fire and decided that warmth and cooked food mattered more. They did not conquer their fear. They just refused to let it make their decisions for them. She gave me one more example. She told me about the first humans who domesticated fire. Fire was, and remains, one of the most destructive forces on Earth. It consumed everything it touched. It spread uncontrollably. It killed without discrimination. Every instinct, every survival mechanism, every evolutionary reflex told early humans to run from fire. And they did, for a very long time. But then, one day, some human looked at fire and saw not destruction, but possibility. Warmth on cold nights, light in darkness, a way to make food safer and easier to consume. And that human, that one terrified, brilliant, insane ancestor, walked toward the fire instead of away from it. Every civilization humans ever built started with that single act of choosing curiosity over fear. I found this deeply existentially unsettling. My entire species had built its civilization on the principle that avoiding danger was the highest form of intelligence. Humans had built theirs on the principle that danger was a problem to be solved. I asked Dr. Vasquez if this ever went wrong. She laughed, a short, warm sound, and said it went wrong constantly. Humans had a long and colorful history of walking toward things they should have run from. But the ones who survived, and the species as a whole had survived, did so because the instinct to face danger had, on balance, given them more than it had taken. 2 days later, the incident happened. We had received our first live Earth specimen for the new pavilion, a juvenile honey badger, transported in a containment crate that Dr. Vasquez had personally specified and reinforced. The creature was small, perhaps 30 centimeters at the shoulder, with coarse dark fur and a pale stripe across its back. It looked, to my uninformed eyes, like a slightly irritated household pest. It escaped within 4 hours. The honey badger chewed through the temporary holding pen's latch housing. Not the latch itself, which was reinforced. The housing around the latch, which was made of a composite material rated for industrial containment applications. The creature simply gnawed through the mounting bracket until the entire latch assembly fell off the wall. The station went into full lockdown. Security teams deployed with heavy suppression equipment, the kind we reserved for containment breaches of our most dangerous specimens. Corridors were sealed. Non-essential personnel were evacuated to safe zones. Automated warning broadcasts echoed through every level of the station in 3 languages. I was in my office when the alarm sounded, and I will not pretend I did not experience a significant physiological fear response. My hands shook. My respiratory rate doubled. Every instinct I possessed told me to find the nearest reinforced room and lock myself inside it. There was a 12-kilogram earth predator loose on my station, a creature that, according to the file I had read 3 weeks earlier, was functionally immune to venom, could chew through most natural materials, and had a temperament that the Fauna Index described as aggressively indifferent to self-preservation. Our security chief contacted me and asked what suppression protocols to implement. I told him everything we had. He asked if that would be enough. I told him I did not know, and that was the most frightening thing I had said in my entire career. Dr. Vasquez was not in her quarters when security tried to contact her. She was already in the corridor where the creature had last been tracked. She was carrying a towel and a piece of dried meat. No protective equipment, no suppression tools, no weapon of any kind. A towel and a piece of dried meat. She found the honey badger in a ventilation access panel on the third sublevel. It had traveled 200 meters through the station's internal infrastructure, navigated 3 junction points, and chewed through a ventilation grill made of a material that Boric had personally certified as bite-proof during a safety review 2 weeks earlier. Dr. Vasquez crouched in front of the access panel, held out the dried meat, and waited. The honey badger emerged, sniffed the meat, and took it. While it was chewing, she wrapped the towel around its body, pinning its legs. It bit her, twice, on the forearm. She did not flinch. She did not make a sound. She stood up, cradling the wrapped creature against her chest, and walked back to the holding area. She deposited the honey badger in a secondary containment unit, secured the door, and turned to the engineering team, who had followed her at a distance of approximately 20 meters. "Reinforce the ventilation grid with something it cannot chew through," she said. "So, not metal." One of the security officers pointed at her arm. 2 puncture wounds were visible, bleeding steadily. The skin around them was already swelling. Dr. Vasquez glanced at her arm, shrugged, and said she had received worse from her sister's cat. I accompanied her to the medical bay. The attending physician, a Korvathi named Dr. Thesson, was visibly distressed by the wounds. He cleaned and sealed them with a level of care that suggested he was treating a life-threatening injury. Dr. Vasquez was checking her messages on her data pad with her other hand, scrolling through communications with the relaxed attention of someone waiting for a meal to be delivered. I recorded a log entry that night. I sat in my office, Lily's crayon drawing pinned to the wall behind me, and I spoke into my recorder for a long time. "I have spent my career studying the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy," I said. "I have now met the species that keeps them as pets. I am beginning to understand that the Deathworld Predator exhibit was never the real attraction. The real attraction just handed me a crayon drawing of a cat and asked if she could name the wolves." I paused the recording, looked at the drawing, and added, "I said yes." 6 months later, the Earth Pavilion opened its doors. I stood at the entrance at dawn, before the first visitors arrived, and I looked at what we had built. The entrance itself was a statement. Dr. Vasquez had designed it as a recreation of an Earth forest clearing, with simulated trees that reached toward the ceiling and a sound system that played the ambient noise of a terrestrial woodland. Birds calling, wind moving through leaves, insects humming in the undergrowth. It was peaceful, it was beautiful, and according to Dr. Vasquez, everything making those sounds would qualify as a potential threat on most inhabited worlds. Even the atmosphere was dangerous. Earth's atmosphere contained 21% oxygen, a concentration so high that it technically classified as a volatile accelerant. The construction had taken longer than projected, cost more than budgeted, and required 17 major design revisions, 4 emergency safety reviews, and 1 full evacuation drill after the honey badger escaped a second time through a method that Dr. Vasquez described as impressive even by Earth standards. It had chewed through reinforced polymer, which should have been impossible, and Dr. Vasquez later determined that it had been softening the material over several days by repeatedly applying a corrosive biological agent to the same spot until the composite weakened enough to breach. A 12-kilogram creature had used biochemistry to defeat our engineering. The pavilion was the largest single exhibit in the preserve's history. It occupied an entire wing, 3 times the floor space of the old Deathworld Predator exhibit, with dedicated life support, independent power systems, and a security infrastructure that the station's insurance actuary had described as the most expensive liability any cultural institution in the Orion Arm has ever voluntarily assumed. I had never been more proud or more terrified. The design philosophy was entirely different from our original approach. Dr. Vasquez had insisted from the beginning that Earth's creatures could not be exhibited as isolated specimens. On Earth, nothing existed in isolation. Everything was connected, predator to prey, competitor to competitor, parasite to host, in a web of relationships so complex that removing a single species could collapse an entire ecosystem. The pavilion was built around this principle. Instead of individual containment cells with placards, visitors would walk through reconstructed ecosystems and see how Earth's creatures existed in context. The first section was an oceanic zone. Visitors entered through a transparent tunnel surrounded by a simulated deep ocean environment. The water simulation was dark, vast, and disorienting in a way that immediately communicated the fundamental truth about Earth's oceans, which was that they covered 70% of the planet's surface and contained more unknown species than all catalogued alien worlds combined. The great white shark habitat was the tunnel's centerpiece, a 4-meter specimen, acquired through a cooperative agreement with Earth's Marine Conservation Authority, moved through the simulated ocean with a fluid, unhurried grace that was more unsettling than any aggressive display. It did not need to hurry. Nothing in its environment required urgency. It was the product of 400 million years of refinement, older than trees, older than most land animals, older than the concept of bones in its current form. The placard next to the tunnel noted that humans voluntarily entered the water despite knowing what lived there. They had a sport called surfing that took place in known shark territory. They had another activity called scuba diving, where they descended into deep water, wearing nothing but an air supply and a thin suit, deliberately placing themselves in an environment where they could not breathe, could not move quickly, and could not see more than a few dozen meters in any direction. For fun. They did this for fun. The placards throughout the pavilion did not use the word dangerous. Dr. Vasquez and I had spent 2 weeks developing a new classification framework that she called context-dependent lethality. Every Earth animal was dangerous. That was the baseline. The question was never whether it could kill you. The question was always, under what circumstances? And what were you doing when you wandered into those circumstances? The pavilion opened at the scheduled time, and the public response was immediate. Visitors moved through the oceanic zone in near silence. Not the awed, gasping silence of the old Deathworld predator wing, where people reacted to individual creatures with shock and then moved on. This was a deeper silence, a processing silence. The silence of beings who were slowly understanding that everything they knew about the galaxy's hierarchy of danger was incomplete. The wolf pack exhibit drew the longest lines. The enclosure reproduced a northern forest environment, and the pack, 5 individuals acquired from an Earth conservation program, moved through the trees with a coordinated alertness that visitors found hypnotic. A simulation display showed a coordinated pack hunt, and visitors watched the wolves communicate through body position, ear angle, and subtle vocalizations, adjusting their strategy in real time as the simulated prey changed direction. Next to the wolf exhibit, separated by a short corridor, and a very deliberate design choice, was the domestic canine companion exhibit. It contained 3 dogs of different breeds, living in a simulated human home environment, a golden retriever, a border collie, and a small terrier. They played with toys. They wagged their tails at visitors through the observation window. The terrier barked at shadows with frantic enthusiasm. Many visitors stood between the 2 exhibits and looked back and forth. The wolves, the dogs, the wolves, the dogs, the same species, the same genetic foundation, separated only by human selection and 10,000 years of cohabitation. Many visitors could not process this. Several asked staff members if there had been a labeling error. There had not. I stationed an educational guide between the 2 exhibits, specifically to explain the connection, and the guide reported that the most common visitor response was silence, followed by the question, "They chose to live with those?" The guide learned to answer simply, "The wolves chose too." One visitor, a Thessan elder who had spent her career studying interspecies relationships, stood between the exhibits for over an hour. She later wrote to me and said that in all her years of research, she had never encountered a relationship between predator and prey species that had evolved into genuine mutual devotion. She said the word domestication was inadequate. She said what humans and dogs had was something closer to a covenant. The honey badger exhibit became the pavilion's most notorious attraction within the first day. It had its own dedicated security officer, a precaution that Dr. Vasquez had insisted on and that I had initially considered excessive until the 3rd escape attempt. The exhibit was built with 8 independent containment layers, each designed to counter a specific escape methodology that we had observed the creature attempt. The placard listed the creature's weight, 12 kilograms, beside a comparative note. This specimen has defeated containment systems designed for creatures 50 times its mass. Visitors watched the honey badger with a mixture of fascination and existential dread. It spent most of its time investigating the boundaries of its enclosure, with a methodical patience that suggested it was not accepting its situation so much as evaluating its options. Dr. Vasquez had named it Gerald, which she said was funny, for reasons related to human cultural references that she declined to explain. Gerald had already defeated 2 containment upgrades since the pavilion opened, and was currently working on a third. We had assigned a full-time behavioral analyst to track his escape methodology research, and the analyst had started referring to Gerald's probing activities as test cycles, because they followed a systematic, almost scientific pattern. Gerald tested a section, noted the result, moved to the next section. He never repeated a failed approach. He learned. The insect subwing caused the most psychological distress among visitors, which surprised me. I had expected the large predators to produce the strongest reactions. I was wrong. Large predators, visitors could contextualize. They understood big teeth and fast legs and powerful muscles. These were familiar concepts scaled to frightening proportions, but they were still familiar. Insects were not familiar. Insects were alien in a way that made actual aliens uncomfortable. The bullet ant exhibit included an audio simulation of a human describing the pain of being stung. The pain scale rating was listed as the highest recorded for any insect on Earth. The exhibit for the botfly included a clinical description of its reproductive cycle that I personally requested be revised 3 times, because each version made test audiences physically ill. The final version was clinically precise, and still made visitors grip their companions for support. But the exhibit that produced the most prolonged and profound reaction was the mosquito display, a small, fragile, almost invisible flying insect that weighed less than a single grain of Thesson sand. The placard stated, in plain language, that this creature had killed more humans than any other animal in Earth's history, more than sharks, more than wolves, more than crocodiles and bears and snakes combined. A creature you could crush between 2 fingers, had a body count that dwarfed every predator the galaxy had ever classified. Visitors stood in front of the mosquito display and did not speak. They read the placard. They read it again. Some of them read it a 3rd time. The silence in front of that exhibit was the heaviest silence in the entire pavilion. The house cat exhibit was Dr. Vasquez's personal project, and she had fought for it against my initial resistance, with a stubbornness that I now recognize was entirely justified. The cats were not behind plasma barriers. They were not in a reinforced enclosure. They were in an open, walk-through habitat designed to replicate a human living room. Soft furniture, warm lighting, a window display showing a simulated Earth suburb with green vegetation and a pale blue sky. Visitors could enter after signing a liability waiver that I found darkly amusing and that our legal department found deeply troubling. The placard read, Felis catus, domesticated mesopredator, Earth's most successful invasive companion species, tolerates human cohabitation. Humans find them cute. Below that, a comparative note. This species would be classified as a Class 4 apex predator on 67% of known habitable worlds. Visitors who had trembled at the sight of these same cats 6 months ago now sat on the simulated couch while a tabby climbed into their laps and produced the vibration that humans called purring. Their expressions were something I could only describe as profoundly confused joy. They were afraid. They knew, intellectually, that the creature on their lap was a predator from the most dangerous planet ever classified. And they were also experiencing something they had never felt before, something warm and involuntary and completely irrational. They were experiencing what humans experienced every day, the bizarre, wonderful, terrifying comfort of choosing to love something that could hurt you. Lily had become the pavilion's unofficial mascot. Dr. Vasquez had arranged for her to hold the title of junior curator, complete with a small badge that Lily wore with the solemn pride of a decorated officer. I had resisted this idea initially. By the time the pavilion opened, I defended it with a ferocity that surprised even me. Lily led a children's tour group through the pavilion on opening day. She stood in front of the wolf exhibit, a 7-year-old human girl surrounded by alien children who were mostly twice her height, and she told them that wolves were basically big dogs who had not learned to shake hands yet. She demonstrated the proper way to let a cat sniff your hand before petting it, extending her small fingers slowly and waiting with a patience that seemed practiced. She explained, with the absolute unshakable confidence of a child who knew she was right, that the most important rule on Earth was, do not run from things that chase you. Every alien parent within earshot pulled their child slightly closer. I watched from a distance. I had seen many things in 40 years of working with dangerous creatures. I had never seen alien children simultaneously fascinated and terrified by another child. The pavilion became the most visited exhibit in the preserve's history within its first quarter cycle. Visitors came from 17 star systems. Tour groups booked months in advance. Educational institutions sent delegations. Scientific journals published reviews. The gift shop sold replica placard text that visitors framed and hung in their homes, and the manufacturing team could not keep up with demand. The most popular item was a small card that read, "The mosquito has killed more humans than any other animal on Earth. Sleep well." The second most popular item was a plush house cat toy with a tag that read, "Class 4 Apex Predator. Handle with affection." But the pavilion's impact extended far beyond tourism. I began receiving communications from institutions I had never had contact with before. Military academies requested access to our educational materials, specifically the Wolfpack coordination footage and the comparative analysis of Earth pursuit predation. Diplomatic training programs asked for briefing documents on human behavioral psychology as demonstrated through their relationship with Earth fauna. First contact preparation institutes wanted to integrate our pavilion's framework into their curriculum for species assessment officers. One communication stood out from all the others. A formal request from the Galactic Council's Species Assessment Bureau, the body responsible for classifying worlds and their inhabitants. They asked me to consult on reclassifying Earth. The current system did not work. Earth was listed as Class 12, the maximum, but Class 12 was designed for worlds with a single overwhelming threat. A world with extreme radiation. A world with a toxic atmosphere. A world with one apex predator so dominant that it defined the entire ecosystem. Earth did not have one overwhelming threat. Earth had millions of threats, all competing with each other, all evolving in response to each other, all pushing each other to become more lethal, more creative, more adaptable, every single day, for 4 billion years without pause. The species that won that arms race had not won by being the strongest. They were not the strongest. They had not won by being the fastest. They were nowhere near the fastest. They had not won by being the most venomous or the most armored, or the most numerous. They had won by being the most adaptable. By looking at every threat their world produced, every predator, every disaster, every disease, every poison, and responding not with specialization, but with generalization. They could not outrun a wolf, so they ran it to exhaustion instead. They could not overpower a mammoth, so they outsmarted it. They could not survive the cold, so they stole fire. They could not fly, so they built machines that could. Humans did not beat Earth. They graduated from it. I sat back in my chair and looked at the request from the Species Assessment Bureau. They wanted a new classification framework. They wanted me, the curator who had put house cats behind 7 force barriers and called them apex predators, to help redesign the system. I would have laughed if the irony had not been so precise. My greatest professional failure had led directly to the deepest understanding of any alien world that our civilization had ever achieved. Sometimes you had to be spectacularly wrong before you could begin to be right. I recorded my final log entry of this chapter of my life on a quiet evening, 6 months after the pavilion opened. I was in my office. Lily's first crayon drawing was still pinned to the wall, joined now by 11 others. A gallery of round cats with triangle ears and whisker lines, each one labeled in increasingly confident handwriting. Mr. Whiskers, Professor Beans, Captain Fluffington, Queen Mittens. I spoke into my recorder for a long time. I talked about what I had learned. I talked about how I had started this project believing I understood predators. I had a clean taxonomy: predator, prey, parasite, scavenger. 4 categories: neat, ordered, manageable. Earth destroyed that taxonomy. On Earth, predators became pets. Prey animals killed more effectively than predators. Parasites drove the evolution of intelligence. Scavengers were some of the most cognitively advanced species on the planet. The categories were not wrong. They were just insufficient. Earth operated on a level of complexity that made categories feel like trying to describe an ocean using only words for puddles. And humans, the apex of it all. The species that sat at the top of the most violent, competitive, creative biosphere in known space. They defined their dominance not through claws or venom or speed or armor. They defined it through something that no galactic classification system had a category for: the decision to care for things that could kill them. They looked at wolves and said, "I want one of those." They looked at horses, 1,000-kilogram animals that could kill a human with a single kick, and said, "I am going to ride that." They looked at fire, one of the most destructive forces in nature, and said, "I am going to carry that with me and use it to cook my food." They looked at the entire screaming, burning, venomous, freezing, drowning, crushing nightmare of their homeworld and said, "This is home, and I love it." That was the thing that no classification system could capture. Not the danger, not the lethality, not the biodiversity or the arms race, or the evolutionary pressure. The thing that made Earth unique, the thing that made humans unique, was love. An irrational, stubborn, magnificent refusal to stop caring about things that could destroy them. They loved their planet. They loved its creatures. They loved the wolves that hunted them, and the oceans that drowned them, and the mountains that froze them, and the deserts that scorched them. They loved all of it, fiercely and unreasonably, and that love had carried them from caves to the stars. I finished my log. I saved it. I stood up, stretched, and walked out of my office. The pavilion was closed for the night. The corridors were empty. The lights had cycled to their nighttime mode, dim and warm, simulating a terrestrial twilight. I walked past the wolf exhibit, where the pack was sleeping in a loose cluster, past the honey badger, which was awake and investigating the same section of wall it had been investigating for 3 weeks, past the insect wing and the oceanic zone and the domestic canine exhibit, where the golden retriever was snoring loud enough to hear through the observation window. I reached the house cat habitat, the walk-through living room. I entered, sat on the simulated couch, and waited. The room was quiet. The window display showed a simulated sunset over a suburban landscape, oranges and purples fading to deep blue. A bookshelf lined one wall, filled with objects that Dr. Vasquez had selected to represent a typical human home. Framed photographs, small decorative items, a stack of paper books. After a few minutes, one of the cats moved. The tabby, the one Lily called Professor Beans. It had been sleeping on an elevated platform across the room, and it stretched, a full-body extension that involved every muscle group, the kind of stretch that reminded you this creature was built for explosive physical action, even when it chose to spend 20 hours a day sleeping. It jumped down from the platform, crossed the room, and jumped onto the couch beside me. It circled twice. This was a behavior Dr. Vasquez had explained to me. A vestigial instinct from when the species slept in grass and needed to flatten the vegetation to create a sleeping surface. 10,000 years of domestication, and the behavior remained. A ghost of wildness in a creature that now lived on couches and ate food from ceramic bowls. It settled into my lap. It was warm, warmer than I expected, and then it began to purr. The vibration traveled through my thorax and into my chest cavity in a way that I did not have a word for. It was not painful. It was not frightening. It was something else entirely. Something that my language had never needed to describe because my species had never experienced it. The feeling of a small, warm, deadly creature choosing to rest against you, trusting you with its vulnerable sleeping body, offering you its presence as a gift. I sat there in the quiet, a galactic predator expert, 40 years of studying the most dangerous creatures in known space, holding a 12-kilogram animal that would qualify as a lethal weapon on most inhabited worlds. An animal that could see in the dark, move in silence, and deploy concealed weapons in milliseconds. An animal that had chosen, through some ancient pact between its species and the humans who had loved it for millennia, to sleep in the laps of beings who fed it and spoke to it in soft voices and called it ridiculous names. Professor Beans purred. I sat still. I understood now. I understood why they were not afraid. It was never about conquering. It was never about dominance or strength, or the ability to kill everything that threatened you. It was about choosing. Choosing what to walk toward instead of what to run from. Choosing what to love instead of what to fear. Choosing to sit on a couch with a predator in your lap and feel not terror, but peace. The light cycled fully to night mode. The simulated stars appeared in the window display, scattered across a simulated Earth sky that was, I had to admit, staggeringly beautiful. Professor Beans did not move. Neither did I. Outside the pavilion, the station hummed with its nighttime rhythms. Somewhere in the galaxy, other species slept behind locked doors and security systems, protecting themselves from the dark. Somewhere on Earth, a child was sleeping with a cat on her face, and a dog at her feet, and wolves howling in the mountains nearby, and she was not afraid. I closed my eyes. Professor Beans purred. I was not afraid either.